This is a production of Cornell University.
As always, we'll keep it to the fastest 30 minutes in turf. Some have asked us, aren't all 30 minutes? And to that, I would say there are disruptions in the space-time continuum because this show is so engaging and interesting. So we'll get right on with it today. This is going to be episode 12 of the Cornell Turf Show series this year. Our guest today, Dr. Matt Elmore from Rutgers University. Excited to have Matt on today to talk about some spring weed issues. That's always a topic of conversation. So we'll get to that with Matt in a little bit. But as always, we'll start off with kind of a weekly review and update for Frank. Frank, it's snowing here. I don't know if you have anything to make us feel better up here in upstate New York.
I'm showing you a picture of a cemetery. I don't know if that makes you feel better, but it's certainly where I got to get out and about into the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn this week. And you're looking at one of our research plots there that's investigating using different mixes for the cemetery. And this happens to be a sort of old-fashioned horse pasture mix that we made with John Seib on Long Island from All Pro Horticulture. And actually, over the last couple of years, has been looking pretty good. So we're starting out with something a little bit funny today, Carl. With the cemetery, it's not the most uplifting. It is snowing, but it also is National Lawn Care Month. So I think it's good to remind people beyond just how they look as to what how lawns sort of involved. This is our grounds week. And I've decided that, Carl, I'm going to wade right into this, brother. I'm going to get myself in a whole bunch of trouble in the next several minutes trying to wade my way through what this is and what this obsession is with banning blowers and our industry using blowers, particularly in the grounds area. This is an example of a ban in place outside the fall window, right? They'll let you do it for cleanup in the spring and then for leaf drop in the fall, but they want these things shut down during the non-fall period. So I poked around a little bit looking for this information a little bit about this. And of course, this is a big time of it being used. And honestly, I've talked to a lot of my extension colleagues in the region, and many of them have noticed as they stepped outside the cacophony of blowers that seem to dominate the sound of the landscape. And it's good. No, people are working. This is all good from it's legal to do. All those things are good. But I pulled something from an article from FacilitiesNet and then from another article that was looking at Palm Springs in particular. And so first off, people make the objection that there's, for 1 hour, they equal a car driving for 8 hours, right? They're blowing dust all over the place, right? Okay, so they're blowing, so you got carbon monoxide, you got dust, it's blowing quite a bit of air around. They're noisy, and it's bad for your ears. So obviously your operators are going to want to wear some hearing protection. In Palm Springs, I'll get back to this comment in a second. In Palm Springs, when they put the ban into effect, 1 out of 4 calls into the code enforcement office were reporting leaf blower violations. Now, of course, life's kind of tough in Palm Springs, I imagine, for some folks. So calling into the code enforcement officer was one thing, but it just felt like these things are not effective. Most guys are just splouting the rules in some of these places. Now, I'm not a big fan of more regulation unless it's really well thought out. And so here are these 2 legislators commenting in New York. This is about the ban going on that they're being proposed in New York. These are 2 legislators in the Bronx. One of them is from the Bronx. Much of this work done by leaf blower is often unnecessary. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. It can be done by environmentally friendly tools. I'd like them to discuss what those are. Oh, a mulching mower. Well, how does a mulching mower get the stuff off the sidewalk? So, I feel like, everybody laughs like, oh, National Lawn Care Month. Oh, isn't that sweet? Oh, that's sort of stupid. Well, why should we promote these things? And then when you realize you're dealing a lot of times with people who make rules who simply don't understand the nature of the work or are listening to one side of the story. And I don't think anybody that uses blowers like pesticides and other sorts of things wants to hurt the environment, wants to blow dust around at a loud sound that hurts everybody's ears. I think that it's good to sort of force innovation sometimes, but these bans are really putting a significant burden on the landscape operator. So I know this has nothing to do with the conversation about weeds today, but I thought I would rant a little bit about it because we hear from a lot of people about this on a pretty regular basis. Now, listen, Carl, I'm going to transition to your tip here and just say, well, maybe you're the kind of person that does this to their front lawn. This is some work we're currently doing with Bill Miller, our greenhouse professor working with the Dutch bulb industry here at Cornell. And while he's been looking at sort of putting these things into the landscape to sort of make the landscape look pretty, I'm much more interested in using these tools, these flowers as tools for reducing mowing in the spring. Maybe I can cut back on a few mowings. How long can we go before we have to mow these things for them to maintain their perenniality, right? So Bill's starting to ask these questions. We've got them planted in different grasses, looking at growth rates. And so we're trying to get a better idea. My idea is, hey, maybe I can save some mowing in the springtime. I'm not a fan of these rows that Bill likes. I like the meadowed planting approach here, where we just spread them out into the lawn. So we'll give you pictures of this as we progress. Now listen, Carl, I bet a lot of people are looking down at the ground in the spring after they blow everything away and they got a lot of bare ground. So what are your thoughts about this as a tip for the day?
Yeah, so today's topic obviously will be focusing on weed control, but one of the first things we always talk about when it comes to weed control is the best way to keep weeds out is to have a dense stand of turf. And when you see this bare ground early in the spring, what I think I'm staring out at my yard right now where my dog runs around and tears the place up is why don't we just throw some seed out there and use seed, the latest varieties. We have Matt Elmore on today from Rutgers, which of course the breeding program at Rutgers produces so much great new genetics. So our tip of the day today, great quote from Betsy Land: underseeding is overrated, meaning, it's overrated not to throw seed out there. And I think, sometimes maybe we overlook seed, maybe it's too simple, it's too obvious, but, again, introducing seed, not just once during the year, but repetitive overseeding. We've seen this on athletic fields with our sports folks talking about routine traffic and using seed to keep that dense stand of turf. Really, again, underseeding is overrated. Let's get some more seed out there and create a dense stand of turf to keep weeds out.
And I think some of it, Carl, is, lawns are considered perennial crops, right? It's like, wait a minute, what do I got to keep seeding the darn thing for? Doesn't it just keep coming up back from the ground? Or isn't there something underneath the soil that it grows from? I think there's this misconception that somewhat because it's a perennial plant, that maybe it doesn't require regular overseeding. Now, as we think about overseeding and getting grass to grow, obviously soil temperature is a big driver of this. And you can see in just a couple of days, the soil is starting to warm now up into the Hudson Valley, certainly warm enough down where Matt is in north central Jersey, where you can get pretty good germination, especially on a bright sunny day where the soil might be bare. It'll warm up pretty good early on. Now, the thing that you have to keep in mind is up until these last few days, we've been well ahead of normal. Most of the region is a week to 2 weeks, to some places like around Buffalo, 3 weeks ahead of normal. So, you're talking about a growing season that's already been well underway, soils that are now warming up, but at the same time, it looks like the rainfall is going to make its way along the coast. We've been relatively dry for much of the Northeast, parts of the Northeast. Of course, the story around this show is wherever Rich Buckley is, Matt, it's always raining a little bit. No matter when we talk to Rich, it's raining wherever he is. It's not Friday, so I gotta believe it must be raining in Jersey today somewhere. So we know there are some areas that are getting plenty of moisture. The soil's starting to warm. The season's getting ahead of itself. It looks like we're going to get a little bit of a stall now. It looks like moving forward, we're not going to see a big advancement in temperature. We're going to sit here at normal, and normal is between mid 50s and mid 60s now. We'll get some rainfall along the coast. And as that rainfall and cool weather comes, over the last several years, we've seen increasing problems in lawn areas with red thread. This is a disease oftentimes historically associated with low fertility. But as Brother Rich Buckley tells us, fungi don't read the books. And it looks like either the conditions are becoming more conducive to this particular problem, the grasses we're putting into the landscape that we might not have selected for this particular problem might be having some weaknesses. There just may be more pathogen around now with the changing climate. Who knows what the reason is, but I don't think most people would deny they're not seeing it more than they used to see it. So red thread, one we used to think we could fertilize our way out of, we're starting to see in areas now where even then they're well fertilized, when you get this growth early like we've had, and now it stalls and sits there, the fungi gets established as well. A lot of like weeds, they all get established as well. And if it gets wet and if it stays a little bit warm, those things might keep growing while our grasses might not keep growing. So it's important to understand now we're going to start seeing broadleaf weeds. And, we use the old Midwest growing degree day model for dandelions and 2,4-D, the two formulations of that. And you can see, you're really early still, even out to the 22nd. You can go to our forecast website. We put these maps in. You can see a singular day like today or way out into the future. That's the wonderful part about these particular maps that we give you some idea of what might be coming. Now, we use the GDD tracker for the pre-emergent stuff just for timing. I've always been interested. It seems about a week or two ahead of where germination is. I'm kind of interested in it. It's saying it's pretty late now, Matt. Now we're going to get the questions with you, but I didn't have you on just to answer the old softball crabgrass questions or even goosegrass questions, which I know you're doing a lot of work on these days. We're starting to get comments from the field about your pal here, false green kyllinga.
Yep.
We've had some reports of it coming in on sod and also some Japanese stiltgrass, Matt.
Yeah.
Starting to get reports of Japanese stiltgrass. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to, start with just, hey, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. Appreciate you taking the time. Let's start with the easy stuff before I get you to the tricky stuff. Pre-emergent crabgrass control, lining it up with what Carl might be talking about with seed. How do you balance those two things in the lawn and grounds area, right? Because you can't deny what he said is right. Yeah, let's get some grass growing. But you also can't deny, man, crabgrass is pretty nasty the further south you get, right? So how do you balance those things?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's tricky. I mean, you do have to probably decide, am I going to put out a traditional pre-emergent or am I going to seed? And then if you go the route of seed, then you have to get creative with your crabgrass control if there's a lot of crabgrass in there, and you have to potentially, we're looking at tenacity as an option around seeding, or waiting for post-emergence control with something like drive or quinclorac. But tenacity doesn't have the residual of your traditional pre-emergence. So it's you have to pick one strategy, I guess.
But when I'm not going to leave you that easy. When you use the word creative, you have to be creative with your crabgrass. And the people who listen to this show, Matt, are the most creative professionals, in the industry today. So I want to give you a chance to elaborate on that. You mentioned quinclorac, you mentioned tenacity. There's a claim. I know you're toying around with Fiesta. I wonder how something like that might be in the seed bed. Does creative mean watch and then react? Would you go post like we used to have that? Remember that Square One herbicide that had the combo? I think they stopped making it.
They don't
feel about choosing the seed and then trying to follow up with the posts.
Yeah. So if you've got areas that are really bare and, essentially you'd be putting out a pre-emergent on bare soil, we don't want that situation, right? That's not going to work. So you basically need to come up with a game plan for those areas you're going to seed of, okay, what's my post-emergence herbicide program going to be? and how am I going to work that, in with the seeding. And essentially, if you seed now, get a couple mowings on that, on those seedlings, then you can start to utilize your post-emergence herbicides, like, things with quinclorac or acclaim. And we have been doing some work with Fiesta. We haven't looked at it on seedlings, but that's probably something we need to do. And so, yeah, I think you just need to have a game plan, and you need to be ready to make those applications, and don't wait until the plants get too big, because once you get behind the 8 ball, especially in a new seed bed, it's going to be an uphill battle. So if, by, say you seeded next week, let's say, by May 15th, end of May, you really need to make sure you're scouting those areas so that you can make the herbicide application if you need it.
That's right.
And then maybe, so that would be my strategy, I guess, if I'm seeding.
Yeah, and that's good, because creative also means the ability to be responsive, right? If you're running a traditional thing where you visit and this is what it is and that's that, the pre-emergent approach certainly works there. Now, let me move on to the other one that tends to be the scourge in most landscapes is now what got me concerned about these last couple of years is goosegrass. How does goosegrass fit into this starting and stopping of the early season? The early applications that we have to sometimes make for crabgrass, and maybe even kyllinga, and maybe even for steelgrass. I don't presume to know that yet. And how does that jive with goosegrass pressure, which can germinate even later, right? I mean, it comes in later and germinates later. How do you jive that with goosegrass stuff, man?
These pre-emergence programs?
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably, if goosegrass is a real problem, you need to think about a second pre-emergence application, probably, or you need to be ready with the post-emergence herbicides. And I think in a lot of cases, the post-emergence herbicides can be a good option if you don't want to make multiple pre-emergence applications, because I know sometimes there's concern about that, multiple pre-emergence applications, especially on athletic fields. So it's, the herbicide options are a little different. And I think that's a key, is that as goosegrass seems to start to move more throughout the region, you just need to make sure you can identify it, even when it's relatively small, differentiate it from crabgrass, because, a real tool in the toolbox for crabgrass is quinclorac drive, and that doesn't do anything to goosegrass. It may, so then, if goosegrass is a problem, you need to look maybe to herbicides, post-emergence herbicides like acclaim and Pilex. And again, just trying to be proactive and making applications when the plants are small is going to be a big help to use less pesticide. And so, but the big thing with both of these weeds is kind of going back to what Carl said, is really, the herbicide is a good tool, but you got to think about creating turf competition. And especially with goosegrass, it seems like it really does not do well if there's good turf competition. So, anything you can do right now to actually get out in front of that goosegrass, get some turf competition, I think will pay dividends later in the summer in terms of reduced herbicide applications, reduced goosegrass pressure. But it is becoming, more of a problem. I don't think we have to worry about goosegrass emergence yet. Soil temps are still cool, and we're not getting, sometimes this time of year we get those wild temperature swings where we get a few 80-degree days and then it cools back down. We've kind of just been steadily warming, it seems, this year. So, things are, we're starting to see crabgrass emergence, and I think we're a ways away from goosegrass. But yeah, I think, and I know I'm kind of going off here, but with goosegrass, I think the thing to be concerned about too is if we get weather late in the season, that, wet conditions late in the summer, we get, diseases that come in and thin out the turf. That's, I think, where goosegrass really gets a foothold is. You get Pythium, you get gray leaf spot, you get flooding. That's where it seems like if we get those weather conditions in August, that you really actually can get some goosegrass coming in.
Well, I just love that you got a beat on goosegrass, because I think that's the way we have to be with these issues. We got to be out ahead of it, seeing it coming and knowing how to adapt and adjust, because it's not just you use different products. You have to approach a post-emergent strategy differently than you approach a pre-emergent strategy, no matter what they are. So let's get to, how do you like the Have you found any value in these spring dandelion models for really being good times for these apps? Have you ever played around with that? And what is your thought about spring broadleaf weed control in general, recognizing it's post-emergent?
Yeah, we haven't done any really work here looking at different timings. I think the growing degree day models that are out there are pretty good. And I think the key is just make sure that the weeds are actively growing. And I think avoiding sometimes that peak flowering period can help too, even though that's when they're most obvious.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we haven't done a lot there. I mean, the products are pretty good.
Yeah, don't need to go anymore. I just wanted to throw it in there because we use that model, and a lot of people like spring control because that's when you see them. But of course, we know the best time to do it is in the latter part of the season for deeper, longer lasting kill than you would get in the spring, which in my opinion sometimes amounts to a burn on bigger plants that wind up needing a treatment again in the fall anyway. Is that consistent with your thinking?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the model is good because it helps prevent, too early of an application when things are maybe too cool. So,
all right. So listen, let's get to the real tough ones now.
Okay.
You've been playing around with false green kyllinga. Let's explain this to everybody right away because it's different than green kyllinga.
Yep.
It is a warm season plant, likely closer to a sedge than a grass, right? It's in the sedge family, I believe.
It is a sedge, yeah.
It is.
So yeah, I mean, it's a perennial. So there's a lot of similarities between it and yellow nut sedge.
There's some time controlling these days.
Yeah, and yeah, nut sedge is a challenge. I think it always will be. There's some new, some of the new stuff coming out of, I saw from Nebraska and other stuff. It seems like, something I want to follow up on is early season applications for nut sedge control. We always talk about, well, make those applications by mid-June before the longest day of the year, before you start to get a lot of tuber production. Right. But there's some stuff that, suggests that maybe making an application in May or late May, shortly after emergence might help. So I'd say it's a little bit experimental for now, but that's kind of what I got my eye on in terms of, well, maybe we need to start making these applications earlier because those plants can actually start to produce tubers, the nut sedge, that is 4 to 6 weeks after they emerge. So especially in bare soil areas, we're not too far away from seeing those first nut sedge plants come out of the ground in this area.
What about the kyllinga? What about the false green kyllinga? Because it seems like the people who have this, it's a big problem.
Yeah. It really can come in and take over an area because it nut sedge mixes well with the turf, you could say. The kyllinga just tends to choke it out in dense mats. So it's a perennial as well. It doesn't have tubers, but it has rhizomes that really stay pretty close to the surface. So, sometimes a sod cutter is a good way to get rid of it, but obviously very laborious. So maybe not an option in all situations. There's herbicide options, and really, I think in serious infestations, combining that herbicide with some sort of seeding operation is good. And so, there's the herbicides that we've found success with are things like the halosulfuron and the amazosulfuron as well. The Solero has been really effective. Sulfentrazone is another option, very effective, especially if you can get to the higher, end of that rate range on the label, get to 6 or 8 ounces per acre.
Right. I think not all of those are labeled in New York.
That's a good point. The sulfentrazone and the Solero. Sorry, the Solero is not labeled in New York.
So that's very interesting. Now, listen. Here's the thing. I'm as interested in the sort of strategy with this plant than I am necessarily the products because these sort of difficult to control weeds. You got to find the time to exploit when they're at their weakest or when whatever you spray is going to give you the most bang for your buck. So what's the timing for this deal?
Yeah, good question. So really early spring, before the calendar technically turns to late spring, we're looking late May to mid-June after you get some emergence, but we have, evaluated these things in midsummer and they don't work as well. It is a spring, kind of application, or you can wait until the fall. And sometimes I've been recommending that because if you've got a situation where your entire property is kyllinga, well, then you're going to kill that off before we go into the hot part of the year. So we might want to keep that green cover during the summer. So another option is to spray these things in late August and then do a seeding about a month later. And that has been working pretty well in some of our research. So the key is that you need to make the application 3 to 4 weeks before you seed, because they're toxic. They'll injure young seedlings if you spray them and then seed the same week.
All right,
So,
listen, we're getting close to wrapping up. I want to ask you about Steelgrass. I've heard Randy Prostak, our brother up in UMass, say it's a shade tolerant, warm season grass, something you don't see very often. What are your thoughts about the status of this problem in lawns that you are aware of, and some simple strategies for controlling?
Yeah, it's getting a lot worse. And what I have seen is it seems like there's biotypes that are actually have moved out of the understory of the forest where we don't mow, and they have adapted to this frequent mowing environment, which is a little concerning.
Alarming.
Yeah. And the other challenge is that it's finding a niche where it germinates before we've put out our crabgrass Preemergent. So that's another reason it's kind of spreading. I think just like goosegrass has found a way to evade our typical Preemergence program, so has the Steelgrass. So yeah, it's going to get worse. It's a challenge. It's good, good if you're in the weeds business, I guess. But
well, let's not gloat. Let's at least give them something they can spray on it if they see.
Yeah. So Acclaim is the only post-emergence option registered for post-emergence control. And the key is to get out, know where it was the previous year and make the applications relatively early in the spring, because once it starts to get big, it's, you're not going to be able to control it. So typically I get, a lot of phone calls in July and August. By then it's too late. So try to go in those areas and look for it right now. Actually, it's already germinated for most of us probably, or getting close to it. So look where areas where it was problematic in the past. If you see seedlings now, that means you've got a problem, and you can make Acclaim applications right now at relatively low rates and still get good control. So it's because it's not you can save yourself some money and not go at that full rate. You can look at the label and it recommends lower rates for smaller plants. So
there you go, Carl. A pro tip as Matt wraps up. Any questions for him from the audience, or maybe a comment for you?
Yeah, no questions from the audience, but I think one of the themes I hear today from you guys talking is the need to be kind of proactive, especially if you're adopting this post strategy where maybe you're using seed and a post-emergent control strategy. If I'm a landscaper and I've got a bunch of different properties, Matt, have you seen examples of those sorts of people being successful? They've got 100, 200, 300 properties. Have you seen examples where they can be proactive on a bunch of different properties, as opposed to kind of a blanket pre-treatment program? And have you seen examples of them being flexible in that kind of program?
Yeah, great question. I've had a couple calls with some large lawn care companies, and they are getting into site-specific management in a lot of cases. That's both within the property and then within different properties. So I think, it's a lot of just how do you manage the data that you have and your applications, and then adapting some sort of spray technology that's going to allow you to be, some sort of application technology that's going to allow you to switch it up between properties. So there are people doing it, and it's good to hear, because as we start to see more weeds adapting to our management strategies, we're going to need to be flexible on a large scale. So
great answer, Matt. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
It's great to see you guys.
It's so great.
Yeah.
Thanks for hosting us. Let's go. Let's get out of here.
Yep. As always, we hit it right on the nail, 30 minutes. Thanks everyone, our live attendees. If you're listening on podcast or YouTube, we'll be back again next Thursday for our 13th show this year. If you've got any questions, reach out to us, Twitter, email me. If you've got questions for our guests, we're always happy to answer those on show. But until then,
for me, Carl, my account got hacked and I'm permanently suspended. I'm dead in the Twitter world.
Getting kicked off Twitter world, but
I got hacked.
We'll see everybody. Hopefully, no more hacks in Twitter accounts. Matt, thanks again.
Yeah.
See everybody.
Thanks, guys.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.